The gas station was deserted. It was the middle of the night, and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerators in the convenience store. A car pulled up to the gas pumps. The driver got out and walked to the convenience store. The driver was a man named John. He was on his way home from work, and he needed to fill up his tank. John went inside the convenience store and paid for his gas. He then walked back to his car and started to pump the gas. A few minutes later, a man walked up to John and said, "Excuse me, sir, can you help me with my car?" John turned around and saw a young man standing there. The man was wearing a white lab coat and had a clipboard in his hand. "Sure," John said. "What's wrong with your car?" "I think it's out of gas," the young man said. "Can you give me a ride to the nearest gas station?" "No problem," John said. "Get in." The young man got in the car and John drove to the nearest gas station. When they arrived at the gas station, the young man said, "Thank you for the ride." "No problem," John said. "Just be careful not to run out of gas again." The young man smiled and got out of the car. He walked over to the gas pumps and started to pump the gas. John watched the young man for a moment. Then he got back in his car and drove away. As John drove away, he felt a strange sensation. He felt as if he was changing. He looked down at his hands and saw that they were different. They were smaller and softer than his own hands. John looked in the rearview mirror and saw that his face had changed too. He was now the young man who he had given a ride to. John was horrified. He didn't know what was happening to him. He pulled over to the side of the road and got out of the car. He looked around, but he couldn't see the young man anywhere. John tried to call the police, but his phone wasn't working. He was trapped. John didn't know what to do. He started to walk down the road, hoping to find help. But as he walked, he realized that he was lost. He didn't know where he was or how to get home. John wandered through the night for hours. He was tired and scared. Finally, he came to a small town. He saw a gas station and walked over to it. John went inside the convenience store and asked for help. The clerk behind the counter looked at him strangely. "What's wrong?" the clerk asked. "I'm lost," John said. "I need to find a way home." "Where do you live?" the clerk asked. "I don't know," John said. "I'm from out of town." The clerk sighed. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't help you." John turned to leave, but then he stopped. He saw the young man standing in the corner of the store. The young man was smiling at him. John knew what he had to do. He walked over to the young man and said, "I need your help." The young man nodded. "I know," he said. "I've been waiting for you." The young man took John's hand and led him out of the convenience store. They walked to the back of the gas station and entered a small shed. Inside the shed was a machine with 2 pods. The young man led John to one of the pods and said, "Get in." John hesitated. "What's going to happen?" he asked. "You're going to switch bodies," the young man said. "You're going to become me, and I'm going to become you." John took a deep breath and got in the pod. The young man closed the pod door and activated the machine. John felt a tingling sensation. He felt his body changing. A few minutes later, the machine stopped. John opened the pod door and stepped out. He looked in the mirror and saw that he was now the young man. The young man smiled. "Welcome to my life," he said. John didn't know what to say. He was still trying to process what had just happened. "What am I going to do now?" he asked. "You're going to live your life," the young man said. "You're going to be me." "But what about you?" John asked. "What's going to happen to you?" John was stunned. "You're going to die?" he asked. The young man nodded. "Yes," he said. "But that's okay. I'm ready." John didn't know what to say. He felt guilty. He knew that the young man was dying because of him. "I'm sorry," John said. "Don't be sorry," the young man said. "You didn't do anything wrong. This was my choice." The young man took John's hand. "Thank you for everything," he said. "I'm glad I got to meet you." The young man's hand went limp. He was dead. John stood there for a moment, holding the young man's hand. He didn't know what to do. He finally let go of the young man's hand and walked out of the shed. John looked around. He was still at the gas station, but everything felt different. He knew that he had to live his life now. He had to be the young man. John walked to his car and got in. He drove away, leaving the gas station behind. As John drove away, he thought about the young man. He wondered what the young man's life had been like. He wondered why the young man had chosen to switch bodies with him. John never found out the answers to those questions. But he knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the young man. John lived the rest of his life as the young man. He got a job, got married, and had children. He tried to live a good life. He tried to make the young man proud. But John never forgot what had happened at the gas station. He never forgot the day he switched bodies with a dying man. And he never forgot the guilt that he carried with him for the rest of his life.
Next story.
The gas station was located on a deserted stretch of highway. It was the only place for miles around to get gas or food. One night, a group of teenagers decided to stop at the gas station. They were on their way home from a party, and they were all tired and hungry. The teenagers went inside the convenience store and bought some snacks and drinks. They then went outside and sat down at a table to eat. As the teenagers were eating, they noticed a group of people gathered in the corner of the parking lot. The people were all dressed in black robes, and they were chanting something in a low voice. The teenagers were curious, so they got up and walked over to the group of people. As the teenagers got closer, they could hear the words of the chant. The people were chanting about a coming apocalypse, and they were saying that they would be saved. The teenagers were scared, but they were also curious. They didn't know what to think. One of the teenagers, a girl named Sarah, stepped forward. "What are you doing?" she asked. The people stopped chanting and looked at Sarah. "We are preparing for the end of the world," said one of the people. "We are the chosen ones, and we will be saved." Sarah laughed. "That's ridiculous," she said. "There's no such thing as the end of the world." The people frowned. "You will see," said the same person. "The end is coming, and only we will be saved." Sarah turned to leave. "Come on," she said to her friends. "Let's get out of here." The teenagers turned to leave, but the people blocked their way. "You can't leave," said one of the people. "You must join us." Sarah and her friends were terrified. They didn't know what to do. Suddenly, one of the people grabbed Sarah and pulled her into the group. The other teenagers tried to help her, but they were outnumbered. Sarah screamed as the people dragged her away. Sarah's friends watched in horror as Sarah was taken away. They didn't know what to do. They were too scared to stay, so they ran back to their car and drove away. The teenagers never saw Sarah again. The next day, the teenagers went back to the gas station to look for Sarah. But she was nowhere to be found. The teenagers asked the gas station attendant about Sarah, but the attendant said that he had never seen her. The teenagers were devastated. They didn't know what had happened to Sarah. They went to the police, but the police couldn't find any evidence of what had happened to Sarah. Sarah's disappearance remained a mystery, but the teenagers knew what had happened to her. They knew that she had been taken by the cult. The teenagers never went back to the gas station again. But the cult is still there. They are still waiting for the end of the world, and they are still waiting for new members. If you ever find yourself on that deserted stretch of highway, be careful. Don't stop at the gas station, because if you do, you may never leave.
Next story.
The gas station loomed over the deserted highway, its neon lights casting an eerie glow on the surrounding terrain. It was the only place for miles around to get gas or food, and it had a reputation for being haunted. One night, a group of teenagers decided to test their nerves and stop at the gas station. They had heard the stories, but they didn't believe them. They parked their car and went inside the convenience store. The store was empty, except for the clerk behind the counter. The clerk was a young woman with long dark hair and pale skin. She looked at the teenagers with sad eyes. "Can I help you with anything?" she asked. "We just need to fill up our tank," said one of the teenagers. "Of course," the clerk said. "Follow me." The clerk led the teenagers to the gas pumps. They started to pump the gas, and the clerk went back inside the convenience store. The teenagers were talking and laughing as they pumped the gas. But then, one of the teenagers saw something out of the corner of his eye. He turned and saw a figure standing in the shadows. The figure was tall and thin, and it was wearing a white shirt and jeans. The teenager blinked, and the figure was gone. "Did you see that?" he asked the other teenagers. The other teenagers looked around, but they didn't see anything. "You're just imagining things," said one of the teenagers. The teenagers finished pumping the gas and went back inside the convenience store. They paid for the gas and left. As they were driving away, the teenager who had seen the figure looked back at the gas station. He saw the figure standing in the shadows again. The teenager screamed, and the driver slammed on the brakes. The teenagers got out of the car and looked back at the gas station. But the figure was gone. The teenagers got back in the car and drove away. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive home. The next day, the teenagers went back to the gas station to talk to the clerk. They wanted to know if she had seen the figure. The clerk looked at the teenagers with sad eyes. "Yes," she said. "I see him all the time." The teenagers were shocked. "Who is he?" they asked. "His name is Michael," the clerk said. "He was a gas station attendant here. He was hit by a truck a few years ago. He was killed instantly." The teenagers were horrified. But you said you see him all the time, one of the teenagers said. Yes, the clerk said. He's trapped here. He can't leave. The teenagers didn't know what to say. They felt guilty for not believing the stories. Is there anything we can do for him? One of the teenagers asked. The clerk shook her head. No, she said. There's nothing you can do. He's trapped here forever. The teenagers left the gas station feeling sad and scared. They knew that they would never forget what they had seen that night. The gas station is still there, and Michael is still trapped there. He is still waiting for someone to help him.
As a huge support, please hit like, subscribe, and maybe share your thought or any experience before going to watch another video. Thank you so much. Have a good day.